The summer of 1680 wrapped Madrid in a suffocating heat. Inside the vast halls of the Alcazar, air thick with lavender and rosewater clung to every stone. But beneath the perfumes there was something else, a sour note that no amount of flowers could mask. Servants whispered about it as they passed trays of wine. Courtiers turned their faces slightly, hiding their expressions behind painted fans. At just 19, Princess Margarita Teresa, daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, carried a curse no crown could disguise. The smell followed her everywhere, clinging to her gowns, her hair, her skin. Some compared it to rotting fish, others to mildew rising from damp cellars. Every morning she bathed in oils mixed by the court's finest perfumers. Every evening her attendants burned herbs until the palace smelled of rosemary and smoke. Nothing worked. From a corner of the gallery, Diego Velázquez, the king's aging painter, watched her glide past with her chin raised, as if defying the whispers. He had painted her family for decades, through victories, wars, and weddings, and in their faces he saw the same story repeating: jaws too sharp, lips too thick, bloodlines folding in on themselves. The Habsburg look, some called it, a legacy born not of glory, but of generations of uncles marrying nieces, cousins marrying cousins, all in the name of keeping power pure. He thought of the physician's words he'd overheard years ago, a quiet warning murmured in the halls: blood too close weakens the flesh. Velázquez had known then that it wasn't just a family secret. It was a time bomb, one already ticking. In another wing of the palace, a boy sat hunched over a heavy book. 12 years old, small for his age, with legs bowed from rickets and a jaw so misaligned that speaking was an effort. This was Carlos, heir to the Spanish throne, the boy who would soon be king. His tutor, a stern man with thinning hair and a voice roughened by years of patience, pointed to the same line for the third time. "Your Majesty," he coaxed. "Again, please, slowly this time." Carlos blinked, his large, watery eyes fixed on the page. His tongue, too large for his mouth, made even simple words a struggle. Beyond the tall window in the gardens, he could see the noble boys, strong, fast, alive, chasing one another under the orange trees. For a moment his face softened with longing, but he didn't move. He couldn't. Every cough, every fever, every winter cold could kill him. His mother, Queen Mariana, kept him wrapped in layers of silks, protected like porcelain. The boy was a king in name, but a prisoner in reality, confined to these ornate rooms, surrounded by attendants who watched his every breath as if guarding a fragile flame. And yet, within those walls, the expectations pressed in like the summer heat. He wasn't just a boy. He was the bloodline, the last chance for the House of Habsburg to secure its throne, its empire, its illusion of immortality. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. The empire's future rested on a boy whose body was already betraying him. The council chamber smelled of wax and sweat. Candles dripped silently as King Philip IV, now gray and weary, sat beneath the weight of Spain's collapsing empire. Reports piled high on the oak table, war losses, empty treasuries, whispers of rebellion in the colonies. But it wasn't the empire's debts that kept him awake at night. It was his children. He had married his niece, Mariana of Austria, believing what every Habsburg king had believed before him, that the bloodline must stay pure, untarnished by outsiders. Now, as he stared across the room at portraits of ancestors with the same sharp jawlines and narrow eyes, he wondered if that pride had been a curse all along. "Your Majesty," the Duke of Medina leaned forward, voice cautious, We must begin discussions about a marriage for Prince Carlos. Philip's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. Marriage, as if pairing the fragile boy to a princess from Austria or France, would somehow fix what centuries had broken. The doctors had whispered the truth in quiet corridors. Carlos might never be able to father a child. Still, Philip nodded. To admit the truth was to admit failure. "Bring me candidates," he said quietly, the words tasting like ash. Outside the chamber, lightning split the afternoon sky, thunder rolling across Madrid like an omen. The storm gathered, as if mocking the king's silence, as if to say, "The bloodline you've fought to preserve is already beginning to rot." The bells of Madrid rang on a cool November morning in 1679, echoing across the city as if to announce a miracle. Carlos II, now 18, was to marry Maria Louisa of Orleans, the lively niece of France's king, Louis XIV. The cathedral was a masterpiece of solemn grandeur, gilded arches, white marble floors polished to a mirror shine, the air heavy with incense. Courtiers lined the aisles, their jeweled attire shimmering under the candlelight, their faces carefully schooled into smiles. But their eyes told the truth. When the young bride first saw her groom, tears welled in her eyes. She had been warned, of course, but warnings could not prepare her for the sight of the young king. His frame was thin, almost skeletal. His jaw, so grotesquely malformed, prevented him from fully closing his mouth. He swayed on his feet, propped up by attendants on either side, his breath shallow, his gaze distant. As the vows were spoken, a painful silence filled the church. Carlos stammered, struggling to force the words past his swollen tongue. Each pause stretched too long, each sound twisted and unclear. The courtiers glanced at one another, not daring to move. The bride, cheeks flushed with a practiced smile, stood motionless, her trembling hands hidden by the folds of her gown. Later, at the royal feast, long tables groaned under platters of roasted boar, sugared fruits, and crystal goblets of wine. But the king barely ate, his condition making chewing nearly impossible. Foreign envoys whispered behind fans and napkins. Every glance, every hushed word carried the same unspoken question: can this king produce an heir? As the night deepened, the palace prepared for the ritual every dynasty demanded, the consummation of the marriage. Monks prayed in candlelit chapels. Servants poured bitter tonics into the king's cup, promising strength, vigor, miracles. Maria Louisa was groomed with quiet instructions, her hair brushed, her skin perfumed, her nerves raw. And then the heavy doors closed on their chambers. What followed, or what failed to follow, would remain the court's most carefully guarded secret. But whispers traveled faster than fire in dry brush. By morning, everyone knew. The marriage had not been consummated. The Habsburg bloodline and the future of Spain had been thrown into question. The years that followed turned the palace into a theater of quiet panic. Every corridor of the alcazar buzzed with whispered plans, strange remedies, and desperate prayers. Physicians came and went, each with their own promises. Some brought herbal tonics, bitter brews meant to restore strength. Others carried elixirs from foreign lands, vials of mercury, powdered gems, even concoctions made from the horns of exotic animals. One physician insisted that bathing the king's loins in the blood of a freshly killed goat would awaken his body. Another muttered about talismans and evil spirits, smuggling small charms into the royal chambers. None of it worked. Outside the palace walls, Spain trembled. Wars bled the treasury dry, rebellions flared in distant colonies, and the once mighty empire that had ruled the seas now teetered on the edge of collapse. But inside, the crisis everyone feared most was silent and personal. The king had no heir, and time was running out. Maria Louisa, barely a woman and already a queen, carried her burden with quiet dignity. She smiled when the court demanded smiles, stood by her husband during ceremonies, and endured the endless rumors that flowed through the palace like smoke. Some pitied her, others blamed her. At night, Carlos sat alone, staring at his reflection in the tall gilded mirror. He had been raised to believe he was chosen by God, yet his body betrayed him at every turn. His priests told him to pray harder. His doctors told him to drink more potions. None could tell him the truth, that centuries of inbreeding had written his fate long before he was born. In the gardens of El Buen Retiro, the royal botanist José Quer y Martínez tended his plants in quiet reflection. He noticed that when the same flowers were cross-pollinated too many times, their offspring grew weaker, fragile, unable to survive. He never said the thought aloud, but he knew. Nature itself seemed to be rebelling against the Habsburgs, and in the stillness of the palace, with each passing year, that rebellion grew louder. By the late 1690s, the Spanish court had turned into a house of whispers and fear. Every corner of the alcazar seemed to echo with the same question, spoken only in hushed tones. What happens when the king dies, and there is no heir? Carlos II, now in his 30s but looking decades older, had grown frail beyond recognition. His skin was pale, his frame so thin that his ceremonial robes hung on him like heavy curtains. Some days he could barely rise from his bed. Other days, seizures shook him until his attendants wept quietly in the corners of his chamber. The second marriage, to Mariana of Neuburg, a German princess renowned for her family's fertility, had brought no change. Her mother had birthed 23 children. But with Carlos, the union remained hollow, empty. Court gossip stopped whispering about heirs. They whispered instead about death, curses, and God's judgment. Priests filled the palace, their prayers echoing down the marble halls. Some claimed demons haunted the king. Exorcisms were performed in secret. Holy water was sprinkled on his pillows, crosses hidden under his bed. Physicians, still clinging to superstition, bled him, burned herbs by his windows, and muttered incantations, desperate for any sign of strength. Outside, Europe prepared for the inevitable. Louis XIV of France positioned his grandson, Philippe of Anjou, for the throne. The Austrians tightened their alliances, unwilling to surrender their influence. Every power, every crown, every dynasty waited for the moment when Spain's king, the last of the Habsburg line, would draw his final breath. And through it all, Carlos sat in his quiet chambers, looking out over the gardens of Madrid. On rare lucid days, he spoke to his confessor. "Sometimes," he whispered once, "I dream of a son, a boy, strong, healthy, one who could carry my name." The priest, unsure how to answer, only nodded. How could he tell a king that it wasn't God who had closed that door, but centuries of human arrogance? The empire that had once ruled continents, the bloodline that had claimed divine favor, now trembled on the edge of extinction, and all Madrid could do was wait. On a cold November morning in 1700, the bells of Madrid tolled in slow, heavy rhythm. Their echoes rolled through the narrow streets, over the rooftops, through the courtyards of the Alcazar. King Carlos II was dead, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, gone at just 39. The court moved in silence. Servants covered mirrors with dark cloth. Nobles walked the halls with black ribbons tied to their sleeves, and priests whispered prayers over the lifeless body of the man they had called the bewitched king. The autopsy, rare and unsettling for the time, shocked even the hardened physicians. His body, they noted, was a ruin. The heart was shriveled, scarcely the size of a walnut. His lungs were rotted, his intestines blackened. There was fluid where the brain should have been, and there was only one testicle, small and shriveled, the final damning proof of a bloodline that had imploded upon itself. As the body lay in state, the council gathered for the reading of the king's will. The chamber was tense, the air sharp with anticipation. When the name was spoken, Philip of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV of France, a ripple moved through the room. The French ambassador allowed himself a faint smile. The Austrian envoy scowled. Outside those walls, the War of the Spanish Succession had already begun. But beneath the politics, beneath the treaties and battles to come, there was an unspoken truth that every man in that room understood. The great Spanish Habsburg dynasty had ended not with a sword or a revolution, but with silence, with centuries of pride and fear, with marriages too close, with the quiet arrogance of believing nature could be controlled. Today, the portraits of Carlos II still hang in museums, a pale, fragile man with a twisted jaw and distant eyes. They are not just paintings of a king. They are warnings, lessons etched in oil and canvas, reminders of what happens when power ignores consequence. The empire that once stretched across oceans crumbled not from enemies abroad, but from choices made within, choices written in blood, choices that time would not forgive. And in the crypt of El Escorial, deep beneath the stone floors, the last Habsburg king lies in silence. His epitaph says nothing of curses or decline, only his name, Carlos II, the last and the unfortunate.